want to get into some of the specifics. So, coming out of the draft, one of the things we tried to do at PFF is to bring different coverage on the PFF draft show. The idea that we can evaluate trades. You don't see that on the major networks. I don't think. I don't watch them anymore. We're live. But on major networks, ESPN or NFL, whoever's covering the draft, it's generally, here are the picks that this team received, here are the picks that team received. But we have the ability to actually say, with foresight, not in hindsight, that this is a good or bad or even trade. And then when you see the players picked, we've talked a lot at PFF, Brad, about if you're trading up for a quarterback, it changes the whole dynamic, right? And that, so the Bears going to get a Justin Fields, chances are that's worthwhile, but you have a team like the Giants that obviously benefits from that if they know they're not taking a quarterback. So coming out of the draft, what were some of the good trades, some of the good moves, and how did you stack up a lot of the moves that came out on those 3 days of the draft?
Yeah, so I think you touched on one super important point there as well. Well, I guess two. So first, this isn't a hindsight analysis. Shout out Trey Wingo. You don't need to know what happens with these picks to know if it was a good trade or not. Right away. We can assess value in the moment. There is a marketplace we can compare to prior trade values. But the second huge point is positional value as well. So, the Bears trading from 20 to 11 for a quarterback is way more justifiable than the Jets, for example, trading from 23 to 14 for a guard. I know the teams were very high on Elijah Vera Tucker, but shout out again, Jason Fitzgerald over the cap. He kind of used our contract numbers to show that Vera Tucker has to become like a top 5 guard in the NFL if he wants to justify the trade package and kind of make that a even some trade package. Whereas, Fields could become an average quarterback and it would still be, okay, this was totally worth it. Yes, the Bears give up a future first round pick, but, they may have landed their franchise quarterback. So that being said, the first trade that we have at kind of the best value of the day was the Giants making that trade, trading from 11 down to 20 with Chicago. They then took on their 5th and then a future first and a future 4th. The one important point is future picks are always standardized. We don't try to guess, this team's gonna be picking 10th or they're gonna be picking 30th, whatever. I guess maybe if you were trading with the Patriots or the Browns the last decade, maybe you would kind of adjust it on your chart a little bit. But we just standardized those, treat it as the middle pick in the following round. But regardless, the Bears, they could be good. They can make the playoffs as they have the last couple of years. They could also be pretty bad. I think it's fair to wonder if the Giants may have landed a top 10 pick in that trade in 2022. So that's definitely, that one jumps off the page as a really strong trade right there. Yeah,
that trade, again, just to reiterate, now you could probably make the point, we talk a lot at PFF here, until you have that quarterback and you keep taking shots and the whole thing. I'm going to put aside the point that everybody should have taken Justin Fields, right? Until you've got the guy, everybody should just take Justin Fields and see. Assuming the Giants are still trying to build around Daniel Jones, which is fine, it's a no-brainer. It's an absolute no-brainer. And I think some of the stuff that you see and some of the reports you even have coming out and some of the things I've listened to, I try to listen to a bunch of the press conferences when these guys are selected. And to say that, I'll talk about the Jets in a second, but you have a lot of teams that are like, all right, I've got my players. I've got my 4 players that I want or my 3 players that I want. And they just hate trading down if one of their favorite players is on the board. And it's really tough. It's really tough to separate yourself from the player that you've been evaluating for a year or sometimes more, and you've interviewed him and you love him and you see the fit and you visualize this best case scenario. So I assume the Giants, maybe the Giants love Devontae Smith and they never would have done this if they didn't, lose him at 10, so to speak. And that would be a mistake. If the Giants sat there and turned down this trade because they loved Devontae Smith, we love Devontae Smith, it'd be a huge mistake because of all the extra value that you said. Devontae Smith would have to be the same value as pick 20 plus next year's first round or wherever that landed, as you said, plus the other picks that they got. And it's just so difficult for a non-quarterback to create that type of value.
100%. And it does seem like that was their target. As soon as the Eagles jumped them with division rival Cowboys, I thought it was kind of funny that it was 3 straight NFC East teams at 10, 11, and 12. But yeah, I think as soon as they got jumped for Devontae Smith, they then were smartly, and credit to our, one of our new favorite GMs, Dave Gettleman, who made his first trade down of his career at that moment. But all jokes aside, it was smart. They still got a receiver that I think it kind of got panned a bit at first in Kadarius Toney out of Florida at 20. But then even Urban Meyer himself came out and was like, yeah, we were hoping we'd get him at 25. So obviously other teams felt similarly about Kadarius Toney, and they land these future picks. So I think that was just a great value there. And like you said, there's no guarantee Devontae Smith is going to be that good. We think he's going to be, a very good player. He obviously tested off the charts, or graded off the charts, and produced, at a level at a Heisman level we don't see, very often. But it's good value for the Giants there. So I think it was a win-win for both teams, but still have to recognize the Giants did very well there.
All right, couple trades. I want to skip to the Jets and Vikings thing, because I really think, again, take the Justin Fields discussion out of this for a second for the Vikings, because supposedly they were in on Justin Fields. They were considering him, but not enough to go make a move to get him. And they at least have Kirk Cousins to fall back on, who's graded well, and he can move the ball and the whole thing. The Bears are in a different situation, right? Their regime is in a desperate spot. You mentioned if Justin Fields is average, he's worth it. But like for the Bears, they haven't had average quarterback play in forever. So it's even more worth it for the Bears. So take Justin Fields out of it for the Vikings. The fact that they have an offensive line that they needed to overhaul, and they had a Christian Darrisaw on the board, and take our evaluation out of it too. The fact that we would have taken Darrisaw at 13 or 14, we would have done that in a heartbeat. But the Vikings trading to 23, getting Darrisaw, then picking up 2 third-rounders. Yes, they threw back a 4th at the Jets. But then they get Wyatt Davis, who's the number 2 guard on our board. They get a free lottery ticket on Kellen Mond in the 3rd round. Any quarterback lottery ticket is just that, and it's a worthwhile shot. And they gave back a 4th-rounder to the Jets. To me, if I'm the Jets, I would rather have the Vikings haul in that mix there. But the Jets came out, I listened to their press conference too. They said, we had Elijah Vera Tucker as a top 10 player in this draft. And they might be right, and that's fine. But to your point, Vera Tucker's got to be a top 5 guard to justify this. And what is the difference between to me, Vera Tucker has to be more valuable than Christian Darrisaw and Wyatt Davis, 2 potential starters, 2 starters on the Vikings offensive line, that the Jets could use because they have holes all across their line other than left tackle. That's where I just think the Vikings completely win this trade. And the Jets have done a ton of other good things. This is just the one move this offseason essentially I've disagreed with.
100%. I do like their offseason overall. And Joe Douglas also is he's only 2 drafts in, but he tends to trade down more than he trades up. He gets good value, stuff like that. But yeah, I agree. I mean, Christian Darrisaw and Wyatt Davis versus Elijah Vera Tucker, it's just impossible. Again, so ignore the picks, just the players that were taken with the picks. It's going to be nearly impossible for Vera Tucker to kind of beat out those 2 guys just based on the odds. It's not very likely. And who knows, maybe he does kick out to right tackle opposite Mekhi Becton or something like that. It sounds like left guard is probably the plan, but it's going to be a tough one. And that's what the Vikings do. That's what Rick Spielman has done his entire career. And I think underrated too is you get the flyer on Kellen Mond. The Vikings didn't have a pick in that range because they traded for Yannick Ngakoue. They sent their 2nd last year to Jacksonville, and then they did get a 3rd back from Baltimore, but it was pick 90. So they kind of had a gap in their picks there, and they were able to get number 66, get Kellen Mond, probably let it fire under Kirk Cousins a little bit. Also give them some leverage going forward, in extension talks after this upcoming season, stuff like that. And get Wyatt Davis, who we really like out of Ohio State. So that was a slam dunk for the Vikings there.
So in defense of the Jets, pick aside, because we've talked about positional value. They drafted a guard who maybe could play a little tackle. Fine. I've made the statement, if you do a good enough job accumulating picks, as the Jets have done, if you do a good enough job, as the Dolphins have done, accumulating picks over the last 3 years, where do you stand as far as picking your spots on the trade up? I look at it like diversifying your portfolio, right? You've got some safe. The trading down is the safe play. All you're doing is playing the odds and saying 3 players are more valuable than 1, or 2 players are more valuable than 1. But every now and again, you got to go full Doge, Brad, right? You got to go, Doge is going to take you to the moon, right? So Vera Tucker is going to take you to the moon, or Jalen Waddle, as the Dolphins traded back up from 12 to 6. They're going for that moon landing at wide receiver. Where do you stand as far as teams that have drafted 10 or 11 times, multiple years in a row, then taking those shots on single, individual players?
Yeah, I agree with you, and I don't think this is probably the consensus among people, I guess, that analyze like I do. But I agree with you because eventually, yes, you want as many dart throws as possible. But look, the Jets have 2 firsts, 2 seconds, 2 fourths next year, I believe. So they're going to still have a lot of premium picks. They're probably still going to be picking relatively high. Next offseason. So yes, you can maybe take a shot. Hopefully he is, and like I said, a lot of teams apparently were like really, really high on Elijah Vera Tucker. So they didn't do it for, Alex Leatherwood. They did it for a guy that everyone seems to really like. Again, we're looking at the other package in Minnesota. It looks great. But yes, the Jets, in my opinion, I agree with you. It's more justifiable when you still have, a ton of capital. Like you said, just like Miami trading back to 6 from 12, people didn't like that move at all either. And they, again, have multiple firsts, multiple set, all these picks. So I think it's definitely, you can get away with it. And if you still have a lot to fall back on.
We talked about the Fields trade, the Vera Tucker trade. Any other trades that stood out on the positive end for you in the draft as far as teams just doing a good job as far as the trade down or a trade up?
Yeah, I got to shout this one out. I didn't even realize how good it was until I just went and looked at, preparing for today. It's the Carolina Panthers trading down with the Houston Texans. So the Texans traded up to 89 to take Michigan wide receiver Nico Collins. Again, I think a player that PFF and a lot of people are high on. This class was great at wide receiver, but a lot of smaller guys, a lot of guys that project to be slots. I mean, Collins is a big 6'4", and all of 6'4", he's a big dude. But Carolina got an absolute haul. So they got 109, 158, and a future 4th from Houston. That future 4th could be, a top 5 pick in the 4th round, based on how bad Houston projects to be. But to break this down, not too nerdy and numbery, essentially, if you just take the total sum of the trade package for both sides, so you say, all right, pick 89 is worth, let's say, 500 points. And then you add up all, 109, 158, and the future 4th, even while devaluing that future pick by a round. Carolina got the 3rd best package, based on percentages in the last decade, since 2011. So 11 years, actually. So it's an absolute monster haul. It's only beaten by, I tweeted out, seeing if someone would guess it. They have not yet. I'll break it on here. So Tyler Lockett actually was the most expensive trade up since 2011. Seattle, kind of surprising, known as a trade down team. They sent 4 picks to Washington to trade up in the 3rd and take Tyler Lockett. It was a phenomenal trade value for Carolina there.
And Lockett was at least worth it, but that is crazy for Seattle. That's unbelievable. I didn't realize that either as far as the Panthers and how good of a trade that is for them. I want to talk about the Texans in a second. Where was the Davenport trade, though? Because that was the most aggressive trade up for a non-QB, right? Or did that mesh with in your system as is that how you would describe it for a non-quarterback, the Davenport deal?
So Davenport's definitely way up there. I mean, you're giving a future 1st and obviously that year's 1st and another pick. I don't know off the top of my head, but there was another pick as well, I believe, to go up to 14, where Green Bay was. Definitely way up there. But when you break it down percentage-wise, it's not going to be as high because, those pick values are still very high for both sides. The reason why this one kind of jumps off the charts is because it's in the, late 3rd round. And Lockett was 3rd round as well. But just in terms of like total sum given up for a non-quarterback, Davenport's definitely way up there.
And so the Texans, who have they have no depth. However, they've added a lot of depth players. I mean, the Texans' 3rd string can go up against any other team's 3rd string right now. The problem is their 1st and 2nd string just isn't all that good. So the Texans have added a ton of 2nd and 3rd stringers this offseason. So I don't want to say that their depth is bad, but their roster's not good. And they have not had draft picks over the last couple of years. I can't believe the Texans making this trade from the other side of the coin. And, even if Nico Collins ends up like a Tyler Lockett, I still don't know if it's worth 3 players, as they just gave up, as you said.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think they did look at the offseason holistically and that they signed literally, I think it is a record now. They signed like 36 players, which is the most I've seen in like a decade. It's actually insane. But as you mentioned, all these guys are like $2 million, 1 year, $2 million signings. Their 3rd string is great, but I think it's their 2nd string. It's just everybody else's 3rd string. So they kind of drafted and approached the draft as though they kind of could then afford to go quality over quantity. Obviously, their first pick wasn't until the third round because Miami still had their first and second from the Laramie Tunsil trade. But yeah, Nick Caserio, he better hope Nico Collins works out, because otherwise he had one of the worst first drafts in terms of understanding value I frankly have ever seen. I think if you didn't give up a future pick, I would not have said that prior sentence, but to give future capital when, like you said, you just had to deal with that, and that future pick is probably going to be a very high pick. You just can't do that if you're in Houston's position.
He's also coming out of a draft room in New England that has been understanding this for 20 years. They've understood this better than any team trading down. I mean, there has never been more angst in a city in a region than New England when they trade down out of the first round, like every single season. And their fans are like, give me the star player, give me this. I want the big name on the board. And they're just like, no, we're getting 3 players for the price of 1. We're getting next year's second rounder for this year's third rounder. I mean, they worked it better than anybody. And it is fascinating to me that Caserio went kind of the cheap route in free agency, which is fine, but I don't know who he signed that's on that roster in 3 years from now when they're probably coming out of it, So that's my concern with the Texans and what they're doing this offseason. But interesting that it's coming out of New England, man. They're like the trade down kings, and now Caserio's setting records the other way, as New England has a crazy spending spree.